Hi, I'm James. I'm a fifth year PhD candidate in the economics department at UCLA. I'm an applied microeconomist with interests in public economics and the economics of education. And this is my job market paper, Do Transfer Students Harm Direct Admits? A Peer Effects Case Study. So in recent years, there's been increased interest across the US to encourage more community college students to transfer into four-year university programs and earn bachelor's degrees, whether that's interest among certain states, specific schools, or even across the general American public across both sides of the political spectrum. They want to make it easier for community college students to transfer and earn bachelor's degrees. This is a fairly large student population that we're talking about here that could use some help. To give some numbers, 40% of all US undergrads are in community colleges, and while the vast majority of them do indeed want to transfer and earn bachelor's degrees, only a small fraction successfully manage to do so. And with this increased policy interest, there's an active debate not only about what sort of policies to enact, how to enact them, but whether we should at all. On one hand, you have the positives, for instance, increased socioeconomic mobility, since most community college students come from disadvantaged, underrepresented backgrounds. Moreover, the transfer system in a lot of states is fairly confusing, so it would help to reform them. On the other hand, you have some of the concerns. For instance, if you admit more transfer students, what happens in terms of the allocation of resources and spots for the direct admits, that is, the students coming directly from high school? Do you have to admit fewer of them as a result? And moreover, what about the direct admits that are already at the university? If you increase the number of transfer students at a school, they're coming from community college with very different academic preparation and background. Could that potentially harm the direct admits in their classes on that campus? There's not much evidence for this, and that's where my paper comes in. So my paper is the first paper to consider whether the direct admits at a receiving school are hurt by transfer students. I'll be looking at this in terms of the peer effects in their classes, and I'm able to do this with three sort of types of outcomes. The first being in the short term, so if there's more transfer students in a class, what happens to the grade of the direct admit in that class? Second, in terms of the long term for academics, so academic final outcomes like final GPA and time to degree, so how long it takes for direct admits to graduate. And I'm actually able to do this also for labor market outcomes. So in terms of immediate post-grad outcomes, are direct admits able to find a job and how much money will they make? My approach, I'm able to use this great administrative panel data from applications, transcripts, and even an exit survey for students who entered this specific University of California campus from 2012 to 2019. I'm able to follow them until they graduate, leave, or at least until 2024, and I'm able to know what classes they're taking, and in addition from the exit survey, whether they find a job or how much money they'll make. In addition to this great data, I also administer my own interviews and focus groups with 40 current students to understand the student experience and complement my findings. So in my paper, I'm able to identify causal estimates under the assumption that conditional on the academic preparation and preferences for class scheduling for direct admits, exposure to transfer students is as good as random. And this assumption seems to be supported by the findings from my student interviews. So what do I see? I see that in the short term, taking a class with more transfer students actually seems to help the grades of the direct admits. It's a fairly small effect. So for a one standard deviation increase in transfer percentage in a class, there's a 1.8% of a standard deviation increase in the grade of the direct admit. It's small, but it's in line with the higher education peer effects literature, and more importantly, it's positive. So it doesn't seem like transfer students hurt the direct admits. It doesn't really explain why this is positive, though. It could be transfer students are a positive role model based on the interview findings that I have. On the other hand, from the education literature, transfer students tend to perform worse on average, academically speaking. So if most college classes are curved, then really this is just the curve artificially inflating the grades of the direct admits. To investigate this, I look at this idea of cumulative transfer exposure. So taking more classes with more transfer students over time, what happens? And so for the direct admit that is more exposed to transfer students, I actually see a negative effect. So they will do slightly worse grade-wise. So overall, this seems to suggest the mechanism is indeed the curve. But with this positive short-term effect and this negative exposure effect, it's not immediately clear what will happen overall. So in terms of final outcomes, conditional on the sorting of students into their final major, which itself is minimally impacted by transfer students, what I find is that there's actually beneficial effects on academic outcomes. Like there's a positive effect on final GPA and a beneficial effect on time to degree, meaning they get to graduate faster. However, I do see a small negative effect on labor market outcomes like employment and income, although they are not statistically significant, albeit the standard errors are fairly large. So overall, what I conclude from my findings is that transfer students don't seem to significantly harm direct admits. In fact, on paper, by taking classes with them, direct admits get better grades, they get to graduate sooner and with a higher final GPA, even if the mechanism is indeed the curve. And there are no significant negative effects on labor market outcomes, albeit large standard errors. If you're interested in more details, please check out the full draft of my paper on my website at jamesyle.org. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me at jy.lee@ucla.edu. Thanks for watching.